Like Wendy, can we take roll call?
Yes, Nancy Hendrickson.
Here.
Steve Fancher.
Here.
Eric Mueller.
Here.
Dave Ritma.
Here.
Seth Reeser.
Here.
Shirley Craddock. Lori Stegman.
Here.
Oh. Shirley, are you with us? So come back, we'll come back shortly. Ken Anderson.
Here.
Hey, you're very soft, Ken. Corky Collier.
Here.
James Allison.
Here.
Mary Helen Kincaid. Mary Helen.
Here.
Awesome. Channy Stephenson.
Here.
Eric Molander.
Present.
Ed Washington.
Here.
Bob Salinger.
Here.
Heather King.
Here.
We have 15 board members present.
Excellent.
Oh, it could be 16 with Shirley. She's here.
Thank you all for attending. Our first order of business is appointment of the Wood Village representative. And I think as we discussed at the last meeting, Wood Village has voted to appoint Seth Reeser, their finance director, as representative, but we need to take a motion to formally bring him into this board. I believe the board packet, does the board packet have language for a motion?
It does.
So I'd entertain that from anybody at this point.
And I also just want to ask the folks online, if ever you can't hear anyone clearly, to please speak up.
Can everybody hear me?
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the appointment of Seth Reeser as the City of Wood Village representative to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board.
Thank you, Eric. We have a motion by Eric to appoint Seth Reeser to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
I heard Corky Collier first, so we have a motion by Eric Mueller, a second by Corky Collier to appoint Seth Reeser to the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District Board as the representative for Wood Village. Should we do a roll call, Wendy?
Sure. As at your discussion, you can do.
Let's do a voice vote.
Awesome.
All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Welcome aboard, Seth.
Thank you, Seth.
Would you like to say anything?
Well, it's an honor just to be nominated.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, on to our next order of business, which is what we've been waiting for, the revenue modeling presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah from Eco Northwest.
Actually, I think I'm going to share the first couple slides here. Back up, Sarah. Is that okay with you, Sarah?
That works for me, Sarah. Who's running the
Sarah and
show?
Sarah Shea.
Are you, sorry, I thought you were running the slides. Do you have them handy?
I can do that. Absolutely. Wasn't sure how. Oh dear. Okay. I have a brand new computer set up yesterday and
Emily, do you have them handy? If
I'm getting error messages.
We'll pull them up on our end.
I have them. I can pull them just a second.
Okay, I apologize.
Problem.
It's always something, isn't it? There's probably
Sarah, before you jump in, can I say something briefly? I think the intent here is staff presented or sent these materials of this presentation in advance, kind of out of courtesy, but the intent is for all of this to be presented today. And I know that a few folks said that they
Yeah,
received
and then-
these kind of short
Oh, yeah,
notice
December,
to provide a lot of comment and feedback at this meeting. And that's not really the intent. The intent is to hear the presentation, to ask some questions with the intent of future meetings discussing this in great detail. Is that correct?
That's correct. And again, we have more discussion around the forecast and the guiding principles. So I expect at least another 2 months of open discussion among all of you about all these products. And that will depend, of course, on the comfort level of the board. I do want to remind you that we do have some sense of urgency because of our revenue situation. But again, we are trying to give you all the information you need and then give you adequate time to absorb it and ask us questions. So there's no decisions needed today. We're also going to try a more unstructured approach to the conversation that's a little bit more organic, so that those who have had time have a little bit more time to dig in, and I think others will learn from that. So again, at least a couple of months here where we're going to be working through these materials before we'll be asking you to make any decisions. Quite candidly, I believe because of the differences I'm hearing among you, we'll take that 2 months and staff will try and learn from all of you and come back with something that a majority of you can agree on. That's what I'm thinking today. And more to come on that process schedule. We've got some draft materials and we expect at your December 7th meeting, we'll be able to give you a preview of what we see happening over the next 6 months or so and where we're going to need you to start making some hard decisions. Thank you, Steve, for reminding me that I needed to say that.
Thank you, guys. So I'm just going to remind us all where we were last time. This is like the beginning of the soap opera where they replay a couple of key scenes from the previous episode. If anybody remembers any of that.
The earth cooled and then.
So Jim was a vampire and no, so Jim reminded us last time of the challenge that we have in front of us to become financially sustainable, to protect our capital investments, to make a better use of public dollars, more efficient, more effective, more equitable, and to build a more representative form of government. That's the big picture vision, right? You can step down for quite a few steps below that in terms of the level of detail that you have all gotten to, from ORS 550 to your mission, vision, values, to some of the program presentations. Can you go to the next slide, please? And I just want to reorient us as well to this little roadmap figure and remind us we're still kind of in between two steps there, right? And so we've walked through, we are working on walking through some ideas around a draft revenue structure, and we have gotten through your summer presentations and fall presentations on an outline of programs and a first shot at costs, right? And so we're in that phase of heading towards trying to craft a revenue structure that the board can adopt going forward. And then you have a lot of transitions and you have a lot of strategic planning and you have a lot of implementation steps beyond that that go well out into the future. Can you go to the next slide? And I want to remind folks too, because we often feel like we have the swirlies in these conversations, and we do, that you're still kind of up in that three-part iterative process. You heard about program concepts. Those aren't set in stone, but that was the basis for developing some cost estimates, which we heard about the last few times. We're up in this area working on revenue tools. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not coming back to the cost estimates part, right? These all have to be kind of swirled around iteratively until we can come out with a proposed recommendation. Go to the next slide. So I don't want anyone to think, and I think Sarah will reinforce this, that we've closed that conversation. There's continued work, there's continued iteration going on there. So today the Echo Northwest team will, as Steve said, provide the presentation you've been waiting for, where they took those cost estimates and the allocations of different kinds of costs and started to map out what kinds of sources of revenue could be used based on the services being provided, the benefits, the geographies, the beneficiaries, to sort of crosswire those, right? And so this is a first crack at that. A first crack at estimating how much those different options might cost customer types at the level that you all are currently examining, and different ways to combine those available revenue sources to meet your mandate of trying to find the right size bucket of different kinds of revenue to meet your mandate. How is that, Jim? I'm just summing up your thing from last time. What will come next after this conversation, I think is important for folks to know so that we don't feel like we have to fit it all into 2 hours today. Sarah's got 20 slides and we've got still more than an hour and a half here. So as Jim said, I think we can have a fairly unstructured discussion. We want to let Sarah make progress, but we'll kind of try to make some frequent stops and get in, enough discussion that folks can really flag concerns and issues. What's next, as far as we know, and recognizing that the staff, as Mike would always say, reserves the right to get smarter on this stuff. Anticipate there's probably a technical advisory group meeting, and we'll start to flag questions in this discussion that you might want to send to that technical advisory group and get some ideas back from. Several members have requested, and I know staff are planning on and working on scheduling an executive session to discuss some of the legal issues that came up in the guiding principles document. And there may be more that come out of today's conversation. And I think that's a pretty subtle reminder there that please fill out the doodle poll if you haven't already. Have you got it set? Okay. The slides are a few days old. There will be continued work to update and refine the financial forecast. So we will come back to that as a group. And then there will probably be some key issues and potential board policy decisions that evolve from this. And an opportunity to start crafting that into sort of the package of stuff you need to eventually build an ordinance and revenue plan for the board to vote on. I think I've got one more slide with some buckets on it, maybe.
I think
Did you want to-
the other thing we are contemplating is one or more webinars around this cost allocation and modeling exercise. I've had requests from individual jurisdictions for briefings, and I think it may be more equitable and transparent if we just host webinars where people can attend. And again, we're working with our consultant team to set those up. So more to come on that. So again, you'll have more opportunities to dig into all this stuff. We appreciate your patience as we work through it.
So that's okay. So Sarah's going to talk through, and Nick, through a lot of content today. And we'll try to make some frequent stops. We're going to be asking you for questions, concerns, suggestions, and we're going to basically put it in 3 buckets. My guess would be the vast majority of the comments land in one of these 3. And I've painted them up on the board there for folks that are in the room as well. Probably we'll have some legal questions that come out of this, and those will go to Hong and Jeff. We anticipate maybe being able to bring those back in executive session. We're not going to try to answer them today unless Hong says so. We anticipate some technical questions coming back that probably are going to be too in-depth to discuss today in detail, that could go back to the Echo Northwest team, that can go back to the technical advisory group, anybody else we need to ask advice of. And we anticipate some political questions and concerns to come. Even in the conversation before the meeting, there were some political questions and concerns beginning to come up. And those are going to come into continued discussion, and there may be potential for the board to make some policy decisions or to reach, that's probably a flag for things that need further discussion another day. So we're not going to try to resolve any of those today, but let's try to surface as many of them as we can so that we can continue building that list and send them into the appropriate channel and report back for more information. Staff, does that sound right to you?
More importantly, does it sound right to the board?
That's a good question too, but we're making a request of them. Whether they comply or not is their choice. Okay, Sarah,
All right.
does that sound right to you? That's important too.
Yes, let's get into it. So
Okay,
you
and
all-
Sarah, I forgot to mention, if I start to see the eyes glaze over in the room and find that you're blinding them with science, I will interrupt and maybe put up a hand and ask us to pause for a clarification and a round of questions, okay?
That sounds fantastic. Yes. We'll get the rhythm here. So you all have seen this slide before, but I wanted to bring it back up to refresh everyone's memory of when we first started talking about this concept together about a year ago. We established some core criteria that we use to evaluate the revenue options and to winnow down the process where we ultimately ended up in the modeling space. But I think that these criteria are helpful to just come back to because they help to further define what it is that we're talking about here and how we're thinking about the decision that is to come. And you saw 3 buckets on the last slide: the legal, technical, and political. And that really comes from these core criteria. We've been hard at work assessing technical from a technical perspective, what this revenue model or the potential structures for a potential options for a revenue structure might look like. And that really involves thinking about financial capacity, equity issues, ease of implementation, and progressive structure. So 4 of those core criteria kind of fall into that technical side of things. But then there's 2 others, the political acceptability and legal feasibility. And as we've defined it before, really thinking about political acceptability is your primary job. One of the things that you will weigh in on. And then there is a legal feasibility component of the decision process and evaluating the revenue structures in this case. And that has been underway. It will continue. And as Sarah pointed out, we will feel free to bring those questions forward, but we may not and likely won't really dig into answers to the legal feasibility. There are some important considerations that do help us distinguish across alternatives. But again, it is not something that we're going to get into in depth today. So just that is a framework for how we're thinking about the different revenue structures that we're going to be talking about today. And here's this slide again. You all have seen this. I do not expect
They'll be tested about this at the end, right, Sarah? There's going to be a pop quiz.
Absolutely. Yes, so because you've seen it before, right? You remember it and exactly what it means. No, we are not going to step through this in detail. In fact, we really don't want to, but we do want to remind you that the revenue structures we're talking about today are rooted in the beneficiary nexus that this figure helped us to define. The district activities on the left produce outcomes and benefits in the second 2 columns that are enjoyed by different populations, the beneficiaries column. And if you go skip over to the far right, different revenue options are suited to collect revenue from different customers to support these different activities. This is our larger framework that helps us to keep in, to help us keep the development of revenue structures kind of within the legal guidance that we have that really emphasizes the connection between the benefit nexus and another concept that we'll talk about called proportionality. So again, just a refresher, you've seen this before, and everything that we are doing now is rooted in this. Okay. So here is where we transition into new concepts. And before I dive in, I do want to just remind you all that in your board packet, you had 2 documents. You had these slides and you had an FAQ that narrative sort of provided a lot of the background and definitional issues and technical information that will help you understand why we're talking about this in certain ways. And so if you didn't have a chance to skim that and some of the things that we bring up today aren't making sense, happy to repeat that, but it provided the FAQ so that you can kind of read along and understand some of the theory behind this on your own time. So please feel free to go back and reference that after the meeting. Some of it might make more sense once, with this presentation context. So this conceptual diagram kind of stair steps down through our process. And these steps reflect, again, the structure that we need to pay attention to, or the principles that we need to pay attention to in building the revenue structures and in distributing the costs. And so up at the top there, you see the operating expenditures. That is built on the cost projections that you all have been looking at and discussing for the last couple of meetings. We started with those and we have started with you remember there were 3 different levels of costs, low, medium, and high cost estimate. And so we're using the medium estimate for all of the work that you see here in the modeling work. I will also say that there wasn't a ton of variation at this point across low, medium, and high, so it doesn't change much of what you see if we went with, say, a low or a high. But for purposes of our exercise, we are going with the medium cost projections. Okay, and so that was our starting point up at the top there. The first, we're going to focus on the first half, the top half of that diagram right now, and that is how do we distribute that lump sum of costs for operating? How do we distribute that based on the types of services that those costs are associated with? And again, our goal here is to make sure that we are identifying the benefits that come from the services that the district provides, linking those to the beneficiaries who enjoy them, and then making sure that at the end, the people who pay the costs are paying them proportional to the level of benefit that they're enjoying. So those two concepts, benefit nexus, means that customers are paying the service fee, and they must receive a benefit in return based on the nexus between the district's activities, the benefits generated, and geography. And then that proportionality, which really comes in the second half of the diagram there under basis distributions, means that customers who do pay a service fee must also pay that amount proportional to the magnitude of the benefit they receive. So those are key concepts related to the service fee portion of this. And I'll back up for just a second. When you all directed us to develop this revenue model, this is a recap, you suggested, or you told us that you would like us to model the service fee revenue option, and that you would also like us to explore in the model the property tax option. Throughout these slides, you will see the property tax option in gray boxes. So that reflects that we did go through and consider what a property tax would look like as part of the revenue structure. We recognize, however, that it is not currently a legal option available to you all. And so it is something that the information is helpful for figuring out what to do about that as an option, and compare it to the service fee option that we have. But throughout the presentation, just note that we've grayed it out. We're providing the information about it. At this point, it is not a legal option to adopt, so that it has to come into the consideration when we think about all the different things we're weighing here.
Sarah, I see Seth stand up. Is this a good place to pause for just a second?
That is a good place to pause.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question at this slide.
Yeah.
I looked through all the materials and I couldn't, you broke it down by single family, commercial, industrial, who pays. Can you tell us, you've got three buckets, the managed floodplain, the watershed, and the district. Mm-hmm. How much of the total operating cost is allocated to those three different buckets?
Yep, so we're getting there.
Okay.
And
don't give it away yet, Sarah.
That's the right amount.
Exactly. No, and the specific answer to that question, we may need to talk about providing more detailed information. That we don't get into the dollars and cents in the information we're providing you today. We talk about it in terms of percentages and kind of walk through at a high level how we mapped that information. So happy to talk about providing you the full picture and yeah.
So yeah, so we don't need, I'm not necessarily asking for dollars, but in terms of percent out of 100, mm-hmm. Those three buckets, I looked through the materials and it talked about the distribution, but not necessarily how much of the operating landed in each of those three buckets.
Exactly. Well, so the distribution, which we'll get to in a minute, I've got a slide for that.
Okay.
We will, the percentage really helps us to understand how that it's all operating that we're dealing with, and the percentages help us to figure to show you with among the four different cost distribution options that we are evaluating. It shows us how we divvied those up at a high level.
Okay.
So Seth, I'll pause us again when we get to that slide, or Sarah will, and make sure you have a chance to ask any questions or comments there too. Thanks for that. And then Emily, I can't see well enough to read the comments in the chat, so feel free to jump in if we have questions in the chat that we need to address here, or Wendy. Yeah, thanks. Nick is responding. Okay. And then
Thanks,
Sarah,
Nick.
I think it may be worth just recapping the conversation in the chat.
why don't you do that for us, Nick?
Okay, thanks.
There was a question on exactly where benefits are showing up here in terms of the protection that the district provides for business interruptions for both businesses inside the managed floodplain, as well as the more region-wide, district-wide businesses that might have interruptions, even if they aren't directly flooded. And the region-wide business interruption impacts are intended to be captured on this slide in that box labeled regional economic benefits. But the interruption to businesses directly in the floodplain, I don't know if it's called out specifically. I think it's mostly captured as part of the access bucket, but it might be something that we need to call out more specifically. And if it is something that we're intending to capture separate from just the regional economic disruptions, but truly the loss of access to the businesses and the interruption to those businesses in the managed floodplain, Eric raised the point that, you know, a flat fee per property account might not be the best approach for that, that instead looking at other options that show that accessing a business is a lot more valuable than accessing a single family home. And so looking at different bases to accomplish that. And that's something that we had discussed with staff previously, whether something like jobs or trips might make sense to do there. But we have not modeled it at this point in time. But it certainly is something that the model has the capacity to do. So long story short, wanting to make sure that when we're looking at our revenue structure and the benefits, that we don't lose sight of the benefit of preventing business interruptions, both inside the floodplain and outside the floodplain.
All right, you took us right down into the weeds, Nick. Thanks.
Okay,
Thank
let's
you,
try not
Eric.
to get any further ahead of the ball here. Sarah, I think we better let you move forward because I think you're going right where people are steering you here anyway.
No, exactly. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So just a few more points of review. Can you hop to the next slide real quick? Sorry, 2 slides. There we go. I just wanted to refresh everybody's memory as we're talking about distributing costs. The first way that we distribute them is by geography, again, tied to the services that are really geographically specific. And so these are those geographies that you all have seen. We've defined them for the managed floodplain, the watershed, and the district, the full district. So we can get in, if anybody has questions offline about the technical specifics of these definitions, I believe that was in the FAQ, and we can entertain those, but just wanted to bring that to your memory. Okay, so you can go back up. And
Actually, Sarah, can James cut in with a question real quick?
Yeah, definitely.
A minor point, but it was one of the previous slides.
Can you turn your mic on there, James? Thanks.
Sorry about that. Previous slide, maybe slide 8 or 9, used the terminology levied area. And I'm a little bit hung up on that. Are we using levied area and managed floodplain as the same thing?
Sarah, same
Yeah.
thing?
I think that
Yes.
that's the only slide I saw that
Snuck
term.
in.
Okay, just.
Yeah, that was from our conversation about a year ago when we developed that diagram, and we have changed our terminology on that somewhat. So thank you for pointing that out. Didn't update the slide. So managed floodplain is what we're referring to there for those the geography where the district investments occur physically and that are protected from flooding directly.
Okay, now we're going to let you go for real.
Okay, so so these 4 cost distributions reflect 4 different ways of thinking about distributing those operational costs across the 3 geographies based on the benefits that the people within each of those geographies receives. Within the managed floodplain, again, we're talking about, this is where it comes back to what Nick was just talking about. We're talking about 2 distinct benefits, avoided property damages and continued access. And for the watershed, the operational costs distributed to that area are related to stormwater conveyance And then at the district level, what the benefit that we are using as a proxy to distribute funds is the idea that protecting assets within the floodplain and directly leads to benefits for everybody in the district from a regional economic systems point of view. So the rules that we have applied in these four different combination cost distributions really represents different combinations of those geographies. In the first column, which we're calling detailed distribution, this allows us to think through and really distribute costs across the full range of those benefits that we've identified across all three geographies. And so we are distributing the costs within the costs for the core areas, the flooding and stormwater conveyance for core purposes. 56% of those costs, according to the assessment over the last year that your engineers did, 56% of those costs were related to stormwater conveyance. And so those costs are distributed to at the watershed level related to stormwater conveyance. The remaining 44% are related to the flood protection, and those we have distributed evenly between the managed floodplain and the district based on our technical assessment of how those benefits, the direct benefits to property owners in the floodplain and businesses and residences and the rest of the population throughout the district and the indirect benefits that they enjoy. Then we take the costs associated with the new mandates, implementing the new mandates. And we, in this distribution, have distributed 100% of those at the district level. And then we have, based on how those costs play out proportionally, we've distributed what is captured in the overhead categories of costs proportionally across those geographies. So this is the most complex representation of the distribution. And again, it's based on those technical principles that we're evaluating. The second cost distribution takes into consideration if our only option, for whatever reason that we want to look at, is distributing the costs to the people within the managed floodplain. So 100% of those costs get divided to the properties within the managed floodplain based on access and avoided damages. And then the third cost distribution is taking into consideration the managed floodplain and the watershed levels. And that is based on, again, that distinction of which costs are going to support the flood protection purposes and which costs are going for stormwater conveyance based on a technical assessment, the most recent technical assessment of the cost distribution there. And then the final cost distribution looks at what happens if we distribute costs, we ignore the watershed level geography and we're dividing it between the managed floodplain and the district, again, based on that 50-50 split of all costs with the direct enjoyed at the managed floodplain level and indirect enjoyed by everybody in the district. I'll note here, again, important point that the ways that those costs, the fees that people ultimately end up paying, that it is cumulative. So someone in the district is paying, and there's a slide here, if you can go forward, there it is. So people who live in the district but outside of the watershed and the managed floodplain are paying that district fee alone. Those who live in the watershed but outside of the managed floodplain are paying the district fee plus the watershed fee. And then those in the managed floodplain are paying all three. It wouldn't necessarily look like that on a bill that you see three different levels, but that is how we are quantifying it in the model results that you'll see.
Sarah,
Okay.
I think maybe we want to pause here for questions as well.
I think that's a good idea.
Before we sort of get into the results, a few clarifying comments that I have, and if maybe we even go back a slide or two, one more. Right. So when we're looking at these four, I would want to say these four are not all created equal. These aren't four options that we feel equally strongly about, and that they're truly considerations for folks to think about moving forward with. For example, that managed floodplain only. Nobody is proposing that all of the costs of this new district be borne only by customers in the managed floodplain. That's really more of a for the basis of comparison, so that folks could maybe say, well, what are the bills that customers are getting today, and how might those compare to the new level of funding that we're trying to achieve here. The detailed distribution is really what staff and the consultant team have come up with as what we think is the best guess we have right now as a fair distribution of the benefits that we're looking at. I'll also say that this isn't just these four scenarios are the only options you'll have to look at. There's going to be opportunities to refine these. And as we get more input and more analysis, if it looks more like 40% versus 50% should be allocated to a particular geography or a particular group of beneficiaries, we can refine the model as such. So this is our best thinking so far, but there is plenty of room for refinement as we move forward.
Thanks, Nick. Absolutely.
So Steve, I've got a question with Steve in the room, and then we'll go to Seth next.
So this is
And
a
Nancy.
question, comment and question, I guess. So I'm struck by both with the detailed one and then the managed floodplain watershed one, that so much of a percentage is allocated to watershed versus managed floodplain. And the reason why I'm struck by that is people in the managed floodplain are receiving a tangible benefit. Let's be clear, those in the watershed are not receiving a benefit from this. They may be causing a cost, but they're not receiving a benefit. They're not receiving any more of a benefit than if you were in the district. There's no flood protection being provided to them. So I'm curious how that percentage was developed. Let's maybe just for simplicity's sake, jump to category 3, managed floodplain / watershed, where 44% of the costs are allocated to managed floodplain and then 56% to watershed. So even if you're pumping costs, let's say this is attributed to pumping costs. It still seems to me like there should have been some type of consideration for, well, if you're causing cost if you're in both categories, but one of those categories is receiving a benefit and one is not. So there should have been some consideration for that.
Sarah,
So the
Nick,
way that I'll start and then Nick, you can jump in. The way that we are thinking about this is that is the cost of providing that service of stormwater conveyance. And you can equate in economic terms the cost of providing a service with the benefit that they are that is the value of that service of stormwater conveyance. Nick, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I'd say two things. I think one, we want to reiterate that the 56% that's showing it's allocated to the watershed, that includes customers that are in the managed floodplain as well. So again, anybody that is in the managed floodplain is paying both the managed floodplain charge and the watershed charge, because they are a customer that is in both of those geographies. So managed floodplain customers are still paying more. And then the second point, again, just to reiterate where these numbers came from, was in the current budget, 56% of the costs of operations are for stormwater management and 44% for flood prevention. And so those are how these numbers came into this workbook. As I mentioned earlier, there is plenty of room for refinement. And so if we want to say, we get that that's the distribution of costs that we have today, but that if we really want to focus on benefits, that the magnitude of benefits are substantially more than their share of the magnitude of costs. And due to that, we want to justify having a higher share of the overall costs allocated to managed floodplain customers and a lower share to the watershed customers. I think there's a valid argument that can be made there. Finding the right mathematical assumptions to justify it is something else. But I think we can certainly look at scenarios in which we're saying, the benefits really do accrue far more dramatically to the managed floodplain customers let's shift this balance a little differently here.
Just real quick, Nick, what I would suggest there then would be if 44% of the costs have to do with flood protection, then those should be 100% allocated to manage floodplain. But then the 56% of costs attributed to pumping water out, those should be split proportional to the area size of managed floodplain and watershed. That makes sense.
And I think that truly is happening. Like I was saying, if 56% of the costs are for stormwater management, and we're just determining that that's based on the amount of impervious surface area. If the managed floodplain controls 20% of the impervious surface area of the entire watershed, then those customers in the managed floodplain are paying 20% of the 56% that's allocated to stormwater management.
And that's the proportionality piece that we haven't gotten to yet, but we'll get there.
Okay, I just want to note to folks, I know Wendy's taking detailed notes. I know Evan is helping us. I think Evan is helping us put issues together in buckets, maybe Emily. So I think there's a benefit versus cost conversation there. I just want to let folks know that we're noting these. We're not just walking away from them. And Steve, I'm reading your facial expressions as a part of that discussion as well. I've got several folks in line. I've got Seth next, then Nancy and James and Corky. I want to remind folks that we get to the numbers next. And so let's clarify what we need to clarify about these scenarios. Go ahead and flag concerns, questions, advice, whatever. But the fun part comes next. Seth, I think this did not quite answer your question, but steers us in that direction, maybe?
My previous question, no.
Your previous question. Oh, sorry.
But I do. I have some, I guess, two new questions. So when you say 56% of the cost is due to the watershed, the stormwater conveyance, that's, and also on the managed floodplain district for the regional economic, it seems, did you guys consider, I guess, the idea of how much water would be need to be pumped, of the stormwater would need to be pumped out of the managed floodplain or watershed if, say, the Columbia River had the same problems as the Colorado River and it shrunk by the time it hit the Pacific Ocean? Like, was there any consideration for impacts that were outside of the district? And that's the same question I had for the managed floodplain, because you defined regional economic benefit, but all of the costs are allocated to the urban growth boundary within Multnomah County. It doesn't seem like there's anything that's allocated to Clark or Washington or Clackamas County. And then how does that satisfy a cost of service basis if we want to actually put an assessment on if we're basically goal seeking within the area that we have the ability to charge, not necessarily looking at actually who benefits or who causes this issue beyond just the boundaries of this district.
Sarah, are you able to respond to or Nick, the technical part of that? And then I wonder if we want to point to Jim for a reminder on sort of mandate and jurisdiction here, or do you want to do those in the opposite order?
Let's do those in the opposite order, I think. And Jim, if you
Well,
wanna...
Hong, maybe you can dive in, but during the crafting of the legislation, there was a lot of debate about the appropriate size of the district, and the decision was made by the Oregon legislature and adopted by the governor that this was the size of our district. We do not have authority to charge anybody outside of the urban growth boundary within Multnomah County. As lovely as it might be to be able to do that, we can't. That's right. So that's the answer.
Yep.
No, and I understand that, but that's a like how it should be charged versus what we can charge are two different questions. And it seems like we haven't answered the first one. We're just starting from, we can only allocate costs within the district. So all of the benefits, costs, anything has to be allocated within there, ignoring anything that happens outside of the district. Is that how you guys built these models?
No.
No.
Go ahead, Sarah.
No, well, I'll just say that if you go back to the benefit nexus diagram, we absolutely recognize that benefits accrue outside of the region. And so those are recognized. You can see in a couple of different places, population outside of the district. there are limited ways to capture revenue from those populations. So we have to come at it from the other direction as well, right? And we can't allocate costs outside of the jurisdiction. This is where I'll turn it over to you, Hong. But we absolutely recognize that benefits accrue to the population outside of the jurisdictional boundary that we have.
But I think it's true that we took an economic benefit calculation for the specific district and then allocated those benefits accordingly. So we're not necessarily accounting for, in other words, only a fair share of benefits are accounted for within the district.
Wait, but what you just said was only a fair share means that you're not planning on recouping all of the costs from within the district.
No, not exactly. I better let Nick jump in here.
But let's take one more try. And Nick, I think our next step would be to flag this for future
And
discussion.
this can be
Okay,
this
and
can
get
be
some
followed
feedback
up.
from the tag if
Yeah.
needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, this may be a follow-up item. Nick, do you want to take a crack at it first? But you have to unmute yourself then.
Okay, sorry about that, the mute button. I would say that right now we are allocating 100% of the district's costs to beneficiaries within the district.
Yes.
But we recognize that not 100% of the district's benefits are trapped within the district boundary. And the
Yes.
way this occurs is because the costs of the district are substantially less than the total benefits that the district's providing. And so we still have a strong justification when we're looking at the distribution of our costs and how we're allocating those to customers district-wide. And we're not putting a higher share of costs onto any customers to capture their regional folks who aren't being charged. But it's still within and less than the level of benefits that those customers are receiving.
So the people within the district are receiving more benefit than they're paying for. Is what you're saying.
Correct.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it
Okay.
also, just as a side note, this provides the justification as you look forward into a larger revenue strategy for making a case for revenue coming from other sources like federal grants, state grants, things like that, because those benefits do spill over and benefit many more populations. But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I don't know if you can see it from outside the room, but you're getting some firm nods here from Hong. So that was a high degree of head nodding as Nick and Sarah were talking there from Hong. Bob, I see your hand up. I'm going to go around the room first here. Nancy?
Yeah, just a technical question on the slide that has the 4 yellow boxes about the 4 different types of cost distributions. The last one, 4th one, when you have 50% to manage floodplain and 50 to district. So since the district is much bigger, the people in the district are actually paying less per person than. Just checking the percents there.
Sarah's nodding.
Yes.
Great.
And people in the managed floodplain would pay the full district amount and the managed floodplain.
Yes.
amount.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks. James, I think you're next.
Just quickly, to come
Turn your
back to
mic
the-
on, please. Might just leave it on.
You can.
It's like the mute button.
Yeah.
In reverse. So just, I have this question about, I don't need this answered right now, but I do want to put a pin in it because it ties into what I both Seth and Steve are talking about, which is what is the basis for 56% of the core areas, particularly focused on stormwater pumping, going to the watershed. I mean, the hydrology around this area is super complex. And I would just want to understand how the watershed, how it's, I understand the cost. It seems as though, unless I'm misunderstanding something, it seems as though the cost of pumping, the cost of stormwater is, the assumption is that the watershed, as we've been able to legally define the watershed, it's not really the watershed. It just seems a little bit high.
Seems like maybe folks online aren't able to hear as well. There's been a request to repeat the question or.
Okay, I think I can do a short version of that, which is James is looking at that 56% in the left-hand column and the detailed distribution portion. And I think both looking for more detail and maybe slightly problematizing the assumptions under that. Sarah, Nick, can you give us a brief summary of where that comes from? And if we want to dig deeper offline, maybe we can do that.
If I'm understanding the question right, I think Nick has already mentioned the 56% was a technical determination of how those costs are split out, and that's what we're using there. I'm not sure I caught the second half. Nick, did you did you catch it?
Well, for one, I think, I have a baby with me now, so hopefully.
Then you win.
Two, I think this question was identified as being something that we don't need to fully address today. It can go in the park. Three, I would say that I think it's understandable. We've had so many questions on these numbers, and I don't think we necessarily need to try to worry so much about why is 56 the right number. I think what everyone is keying in on is that this is the crux of the decision that's going to be in front of this board is how much of these costs do we think should be allocated to the managed floodplain versus the watershed versus the district, recognizing that if we're going to be doing it through a fee structure, this isn't just a political decision, but there needs to be a strong technical and legal justification for how we're allocating those costs. And I think everybody here is eager to poke at those numbers and have suggestions for how they could be tweaked one way or another. I think we've also would really like to include the technical advisory group in those discussions. So right now, the numbers that we're looking at are this 56-44 split, and that's based entirely on the current split of your budget on what share is spent on stormwater issues versus flood prevention issues. But again, there's lots of ways we can kind of fine tune and refine those numbers that are going to get us to a different proportional split. And I think a lot of folks have some great input to share on that.
Thanks, guys. Fun wanted a chance to respond to that as well, real quick, and Colin.
Yeah, I'll just add,
Great.
With respect
Is
to,
your mic on?
yeah,
I can't
with
see from here. Thank you.
respect to the various sections, the statute defines district, so, but the managed floodplain and the watershed are not defined. So if part of the ordinance development and part of all of this is for you all to define the geographic space, which I presume, at least with the watershed, it's going to be tied to some technical information with respect to the influent stormwater that's coming into the managed floodplain, impacting the stormwater conveyance.
So that's our operating definition for kind of scenario building purposes right now,
And
but it's not currently defined in. Go ahead.
and to quickly build on that, because I think that was really my point, is that the current modeled watershed is not the full watershed. It is the watershed for the water that goes in that we developed during the 2019 sort of revisiting of this modeling. So it not going into Pen 2, not going into Pen 1. It's really water that is coming downhill, and it uses the same methodology that we use with the city of Portland's IGA that does recognize that there's some other water that is injected in and other, other issues. So we can revisit that. We can talk through sort of what that shape file looks like, but it is not the full watershed. It's the watershed with water that goes into the managed floodplain and then is pumped out.
Sarah, did you want to add anything to that before we go to Corky?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead, Corky. And then I'm going to try to hand it back to you in the next 4 minutes here.
There's a huge amount to unpack in this slide. And as Nick just said, because you took words right out of my mouth, Nick, this is the crux of a lot of what we're trying to do. And it goes back to conversations we had over a year ago, jumping into this. I didn't see where the definition, you went over the definitions of all these different lines in here, but I didn't see that in the document. Did I miss it?
No, it wasn't in the FAQ specifically.
I would ask that, and I know that's hard to do, but I think it's really, really important to define everything that you guys talked about at the beginning of this slide. Define that for us, put that down on paper and say, okay, for example, the managed floodplain watershed, the 56%, 44% is based upon, flood protection. The 56% is based upon the cost of, stormwater drainage. Yeah, that would help me out a whole lot to have every one of these bullets defined in that way. Thanks.
Okay, so a narrative to accompany this. Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bob.
Sorry, my question just is less on this slide and more on the other one that you just showed. with all the boxes and
That's the colorful spaghetti one.
yeah, and I'm just, yeah, that one. And I'm just trying to figure out where green infrastructure fits in on that slide.
Yeah, so green infrastructure is noted in several different versions or boxes within the benefits. I guess different ways of thinking about this. So green infrastructure, it kind of represents how the district does things and produces a stream of services that may be different than gray infrastructure. And those benefits that come from implementing green infrastructure are represented in some of the boxes down below: recreation, fish and wildlife, cultural resources, public health, and others. So does that help answer your question? It absolutely
I
is
think
here.
Colin wants
I think I'm
to-
looking more on the left-hand column. That's
Yeah,
where I
the
was looking for it,
activities.
Under
I agree
activities?
with you, but
Yeah.
so I'm trying to, and I guess some of the arrows here are a little confusing to me. I mean, I think about green infrastructure, separate from habitat restoration, because I think it's green infrastructure tends to be, although I think it has habitat benefits. I think about green roofs, tree canopy, and those kinds of things, green streets that have benefits for habitat, but also have benefits for things like equity, urban heat island, air quality, and so on and so forth. And so get into the public health realm, but I'm seeing the habitat pop out, but I'm not seeing the green infrastructure.
Yeah, I'll leave that for Colin to answer.
Yeah, Colin, can you
Yeah.
help us with that?
So in the activities column, in basically the top three, but really flood wall, the levee, water conveyance, pump station, but also the incorporation of climate change. All of those, it's more of a paradigm shift in thinking about what our alternatives are, what options do we have to employ, and being able to use more green infrastructure options when appropriate. And so that is seen in the work that Wolf Water Resources produced, and then that is built into some of the operating numbers, as well as what we'll be seeing in some of the potential for capital projects coming up. So it is much more integrated. It is that multi-benefit and integrated approach that we have talked about, but definitely hearing you, Bob, in that it doesn't say levy improvements, including green infrastructure. So it is built in, but not explicit.
And I think it's worth me chiming in that I've asked Colin and Bill and other staff to try and look at that forecast document and really document within that proposal where the green infrastructure and new mandates work lives. So when we come back to you in the next round, when we're talking about that, you'll see a more articulate description of how that initial forecast incorporates some of those investments. Whether those are too many of those investments or not enough will be up to you guys.
Okay, no, that's great. That's all appreciated. I think the place that I would put it, because flood wall and levee improvements and pump station, to me, actually describe gray infrastructure. There's, flood wall and levee improvements are typically gray by definition. But where I see it most likely is in water conveyance and water management. And so I would suggest in that box, adding something like water conveyance using both gray and green infrastructure.
Thanks, Bob. So noted. Nancy, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, on that same thing, I am glad to hear that that's how you're thinking about it, Colin, to be incorporating those methodologies in all the different work. And I would agree that water conveyance is one of the strongest ones where we would see.
Seems like we may be able to clarify that in an updated version of this at some point. Sarah, I know this is more for your kind of internal wiring uses and maybe a community.
Yeah, but it's still important to make sure it reflects. And we haven't updated it in about 9 months, so absolutely can update it to reflect where thinking has evolved. Again, getting back to the iterative nature of this work.
Are we ready to let Sarah start talking about money here? Okay, and keeping in mind Nick's warning or caveat that you don't have to choose one of the 4 scenarios. They are not built equal. This is for points of comparison, and now you can see the cost implications.
Yeah, can you actually can you go back to the diagram there, the flow chart? Because I want to recognize that that flow chart that we have shifted now. We are shifting into description of the basis distribution. So we've distributed the costs up top and defined some potential cost distributions to look at. Now we're going to work from the bottom up and recognizing that we need to proportionally allocate the costs in these different buckets that produce these benefits to the beneficiaries, to the individual customers and ratepayers. So that is where we're going to focus here. And what you'll see in this, you know, we have to develop a calculation essentially under each category of benefit to get it from the lump sum amount to the proportional amount charged per property or per account. And so for access, we have determined that that is a flat fee per property. And Nick already talked about it kind of in the weeds, different ways of thinking about that. This is where we are today. But of course, we can continue to discuss whether there are other ways that may reflect proportional, a different way of thinking about that proportionally, the access benefit. Avoided damages looks at or uses a calculation that involves the value of the property and a flood elevation. So we're kind of, it's a risk adjusted, risk of flooding adjusted measure of calculating avoided damages. So that's the managed floodplain basis distributions at a very high level. For the watershed, we are using a methodology that has been employed in elsewhere for distributing that according to impervious surface area. We get into the details of that, the nitty-gritty, but that's fairly straightforward there. So in each of those three cases, we have worked through with the tag already and kind of determined that these are, from a technical perspective, at this point, the most straightforward way of distributing those costs to individual customers. I mean, you don't see alternatives in each of those. Now, when we get to the district level, how do we distribute the regional economic benefit? We have a few options, and this is where we see variation across our revenue structures into three different categories. And this really is only affecting that district level charge. So the most direct way to think about this when we think about economic benefits of avoided flood damage and business disruption within the floodplain, think about how that trickles down to the economic benefits that people enjoy across the district. One way to capture this is by looking at the connection to the economy, how much they interact with the economy. And one way to measure that is with jobs or employment. And so we've developed one of the bases that we call jobs or job density. And it is not a measurement of specific employees at specific businesses, but kind of a, because for various reasons, we can't do that, but we are using data that helps us to understand how jobs are distributed across the geography of the district. So that's the jobs piece. The other way to think about this is connection to an economy. A proxy variable to measure this is through trips. And there is a methodology that is used in lots of jurisdictions around Oregon, uses a standard way of measuring the number of trips attached to different types of properties. And so we're using that methodology here as a representation of the connection to the economy. The third one, which I've already talked about, is the way that most districts like this operate through a property tax. You're just, you're recognizing the proportional benefit or the proportional allocation through the way we do property taxes. And again, not a legal option available to you all today, but a very straightforward, but for the legal questions, straightforward way of thinking about this. So those are the three different bases that we are using at that district level to proportionally allocate the costs in that bucket. So when we go to, if you can switch down to the slide with the table, I think it's a couple, keep going. So this is how then we are defining those structures for the the different service fees, again, we don't have choices for the first three. That just is how we're defining it. And then for the district service fee 3, which we're calling the district, or that represents the benefit of district-wide economic activity, we have these 3 options. That's really what this is showing, that there are 3 revenue structures. But the 3 variations only come in when we are employing in the cost distribution, distributing costs at the district level. I'll stop there and see if there are any questions. So conceptually, that's where we're at. before we
Sarah,
get
I
into the
just want to
numbers.
share, since I watched you guys go through some of this, that you have explored different ways of calculating this, different data sources. You've gone through a pretty significant
Yes.
effort to stir those up and work through them with staff. So I hear you saying that you've made this determination. It's because there were not other equally technically viable options available that you could find good data and so on and so forth. Is that right?
And that's right. And it's not just with staff.
You're
We
not
walked through
limited
this.
ideas, but that you have considered an alternative of a number of different ideas from the beginning.
Exactly. And the technical advisory committee has weighed in on this as well. And we'll have an opportunity to go back to them as in refinement, but absolutely.
Could I ask you to address the importance of relying on our technical experts for some of this?
Sure, I'm happy to. When we do a legal analysis, and we'll have Jeff Condit issue a legal opinion on the final proposal here, subject to some political factors you're going to be making decision on, that really at the end of the day, we're going to be relying on the technical expertise of the experts, and that the deference, because this is such a new approach to doing business for flood control. No one in the country has done it. So the goal for us is to try to preserve the judicial deference if somebody were to challenge our method, to preserve the judicial deference. So how do we do that? We build a good record, and we have the economic team doing using the best professional judgment to make the best professional recommendation. And we would have to just put faith behind that because nobody else has done it. And really, at the end of the day, nobody else in the country has the expertise that we have. So I think we feel pretty strongly with that approach to the legal analysis. The question will come down to some of the political decisions that you're going to have to make, and how they feel about that on a technical base.
Farther you stray from the straight technical analysis, the greater your legal risk, is the message I want you to hear.
And who makes up the TAC?
Colin, who makes up the TAC?
So there's, I can give you the quick rundown on it, but the technical advisory group includes representatives from Port, Metro, Sharon, Monaghan for Gresham. And then I think most of the cities have representatives. The county has a representative. So in general, there's
Valley Fire.
yeah, and there's also Andy Catugno, Tim Collier from Tualatin Valley Fire Rescue, and Dan Vizzini, who was the former Oregon Solutions project manager, but he also helped the city of Portland in the 90s with some rate setting work as well. So some outside people that were really close to this work. We have sort of updated the list, and so we're going to make sure that has the right group added. There's some a new consultant that all of you are probably familiar with, Phil Ralston with the Port of Portland will be added on there. And so, but the idea is to have non-voting board members have their technical representatives be a part of that. And I think all of the tag material, all of the board had been included on, but as far as actually providing the input, it was those technical experts.
We also have that metro economist on that team as well.
Right, Dr. Harwood.
And we'd be open to adding additional people if, I know Seth, you were interested in that. So if you have additional names, let us know and we'd be happy to invite them to review the materials. Thank you. Glad to meet you.
Did Parky have his hand up? Good. Hong, okay. I didn't see you. You're in so Hong was pointing to you because I couldn't see you in my peripheral vision. Go ahead.
No, I just, going back to the revenue structure, the benefit nexus, I don't want to bog you down on this, but just toss it out there. And if it's something that's worthwhile, then you can follow up later on. But when I looked at the district benefit, and I'm thinking about property taxes, why do you pay pay property taxes. Well, I want access to the infrastructure, whether that's sewer pipes or streets or whatever. I want access to that infrastructure. And if it's flooded, I don't have the access. So if I was paying property taxes, that's part of what I'm trying to do. The other thing is I'm trying to avoid, and along similar lines, trying to avoid damages. So again, if it's flooded, then the whole district is going to be paying up for some of those repairs, emergency access, whatever. And so you're trying to avoid that potential where there's a big flood and the whole community has to chip in for it. Did you guys consider those sort of things? Or does that help any at all? Is that, you know, when you're setting up the district revenue? You have jobs and trips. I'm wondering if you looked at a possibility of nexus with avoiding damages and then also having access to the infrastructure that's down in the managed floodplain.
So both of those are reflected as the way that we're calculating the direct, services and the direct benefits to within those geographies, the managed floodplain. The indirect result of that is that people in the district have the ability to enjoy the economic goods and services that.
Well, but I'm saying the people in the district have that direct effect, that direct advantage as well, I would think. If I'm
in avoiding
in terms of.
So I might be misunderstanding, and Nick, jump in here if you are grasping this. But when you think about avoiding damage to property that you own, if you don't have property in the managed floodplain, I think the idea is there wouldn't be any direct damage to property outside of the managed floodplain from this. Am I missing something here?
Well, again, I don't want to bog us down on this. What I'm thinking is, if it's a property tax, and you're funding all this effort under a property tax, why would you be doing that? You'd be doing that to avoid all those people that don't get a direct benefit, they're not directly avoiding damages, but they are avoiding the cost of those damages.
Sure.
So that's kind of, I'm just thinking about in terms of property tax. What am I doing? And then I don't know if that helps any on trying to structure a fee for them.
And when you're talking about public resources, that definitely makes sense. Go ahead, Nick.
I was just going to say for the property tax category, it really has different restrictions on it from a service fee approach, and that you no longer have to have that close tie to nexus and proportionality. So as long as the public votes for it and they say, yeah, we're willing to pay this many dollars or cents per thousand of assessed value, you don't have to justify that rate any further or any more technical detail. But when we are charging a service fee, so if it's a district-wide service fee, then you really do have to make sure that you're clearly articulating those benefits or costs that you're allocating to people, and that there is a clear nexus and proportionality. And so there we have tried to say, you know what, for district-wide, when it comes to avoided damage, the avoided damage, we really only want to charge to people in the managed floodplain. But for district-wide, we are looking at the benefits that the whole district receives in terms of a lack of disruption to the economy from a flood event taking place there.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask us to continue chewing on that. I'm going to call on Eric and then catch my eye or raise your hand if you want to weigh in again before, and then otherwise we'll let Sarah continue here. Go ahead, Eric.
Okay, so this goes, I'm unmuted, excellent. So this goes back to the question that we had raised in the chat, and specifically, it's really about the avoided business interruption losses. So within the managed floodplain, you've got avoided damage to structure, and you also have avoided business losses. Now, the way that you created this flat fee for each property, you created a pretty regressive tax structure where it's a flat fee where the benefits associated with avoiding the business interruption loss is significantly several orders of magnitude larger than the loss in property damage.
Yeah, and so Eric, I think you raise a great point. I think that we certainly should look harder at a justifiable percentage of the overall benefits and costs of the district that can be attributed to the benefits of avoided business interruptions. And if that category, service fee 1A, we're calling it access, but if we include it as access or avoided interruption, and if we determine that that is a larger percentage, then I think it absolutely makes sense to explore other bases there than just a flat fee. Similar bases to what we're looking at for service fee 3 district-wide on the economic benefits, where we're looking at jobs or trips, for an example. I will say that I think that that quantifying the value of the business interruptions is one thing that the previous analysis on this topic was a bit of a hole in the data that we were looking at. So I think we probably have we might be able to get fairly decent data on that for the business interruptions just within the managed floodplain. But that is one thing that we've been looking at from a technical perspective, is trying to quantify district-wide, if there's a flood event here, what is likely to be the magnitude of the losses for the business interruptions, both in terms of a gross impact during the days when the event is occurring, and then the net impact longer term, as there's going to be some catch up, in the weeks and months afterwards for delayed economic activity that then has a chance to occur later on. So definitely, I think that's a key point that we need to look into further.
Right. And so what I would suggest is that you look at the Port of Portland's input-output model that they did in 2016. I think that although it's only limited to PDX, gives us a great start for understanding what the value add is from the infrastructure in this area, and therefore what is the value of the business interruption loss, because obviously you'd lose the value add from all those businesses. Additionally, Dagami, the Department of, so you know this data?
Oh yeah, we've used we've been looking at and reviewing all of that and seeing how it factors into the story that we need to tell here. So absolutely, and there are pieces of it that are very helpful. It doesn't tell the complete story, and that's what we are continuing to work on from the technical side of things. But absolutely, thank you for bringing those.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, friends. We let Sarah go a few more slides. Okay, I told you there would be frequent stops. This is helpful. This is when people chew over information and internalize it. This is what that looks like. So that's good.
Okay, so we got to go into the numbers here. So we ran the model based on these structures that we've talked about. And if you want to flip to the next slide, we have the results, numerical results of the charges for these customer categories on the left. We actually did run the model for all of the customer categories, but in the interest of not blowing up all of your brains and being able to actually process some of this information, we've limited it to these 4 categories in this information. And this shows the results for that first cost distribution, which we're calling the detailed distribution. And the 3 columns that you'll see there represent the variation for the district level charge across those 3 bases that we talked through. So the average charges here are highest for the industrial properties, followed by the commercial properties. And generally across the charges for the managed floodplain are greatest. The watershed is next in the district. That flips a little with the industrial, public developed, and public right-of-ways. And so I guess when we look at district level, the charges there that we're looking at for single family residential property, and there's actually one thing that I forgot to mention before. Residences don't have employees, and so in the calculations that we made based on job density, we assigned a residence a value of 1, equivalent to 1 employee, just to make sure that we're distributing some of that economic benefit to the households, because they are connected to the economy. We've distributed that at a level of 1. Similarly for trips, I believe it was equivalent to 1. Did I get that right, Nick?
Yeah, there's a minimum charge per household on all these things.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so you'll see on the single family residential, the district rate ranges, district level rate ranges from 29 to 32, 23 to 32. And you can take a look at this. I suppose we can stop for comment here. We also have a graphical representation of this for those people who are more visually inclined. That shows, again, these are the average charges across the geographies and across customer types. And then on the next slide, we show how the cumulative contribution by customer type across each of the structures for the total amount of revenue collected. So you'll see across everything, commercial is the highest contributor in terms of total cost, followed by single family residential generally.
Sarah, Eric had a clarifying question. If this was just for service fee 3?
No, this is for the entire revenue structure, all three buckets.
For the
So
detailed
this is,
distribution that was originally in your leftmost yellow column, right? Many.
That's right. Yeah, so we're taking the leftmost column of cost distribution, all 4 service fees for the structure 1 and 2. And then for structure 3, the 3 service fees plus the property tax.
The column headings can be slightly misleading there because it's, saying structure 1 job, structure 2 trips, structure 3 property tax. Those are just the only variables that are changing in the complete revenue structure here, because we're holding the revenues tools constant for the other types of benefits. But this is the whole package of charges that we're looking at here.
Total bill year 5.
And again,
with expensive collection and under collection included.
Yes. And again, I just want to remind everyone, these are cumulative. So these numbers that you see here, that would be the total amount that someone within the managed floodplain would see on their bill. That includes all 3 levels of charges.
Mary Helen, how are we doing?
Well, mine's a really basic question. I am a single family residential. Structure 3 property tax, which I believed we couldn't call it a property tax, but I don't understand that part. And is $409 additional to what I pay now? Or is it I don't understand what that is.
The total you would pay to the urban district, once it's set up, you would no longer pay what you currently pay. So the average bill for a homeowner in the managed floodplain would be $406 under a jobs category or $401 under a trips category. Remember, that's an average cost among single family households. Your costs may be different.
Plus the watershed.
Okay, so currently I pay a bond on my property tax, and there's a property tax and there's one paid to the drainage districts.
Okay, so the property tax is grayed out because we don't have authority to do it, but you may recall last spring when you were asking us to model various options.
Okay, so grayed out, we don't have authority. I got that.
Authority to do it.
That was all based on the issue of when we had to explain this to the constituencies, the question was going to come up, well, what would it cost me if you just put it on my property tax bill?
That's right.
And we needed to have the answer to that, even though we couldn't implement it. We needed to know what the answer is. So
The comparison.
when somebody says, well, we're going to charge you $104 using the jobs methodology. And then the question is, well, what would I pay under property tax? You could say it'd be $109 so that people understand that we've looked at it, even though we may not be able to technically implement it.
I think it's really worth repeating.
And so this is for a 1 acre, 1 acre, correct?
Average single family home or a multi-family residential or a commercial or industrial, depending on what you're looking at, which part of the column you're looking at.
Yeah, and those average characteristics, we have shown you those before in a previous presentation across the different geographies. So we can refer you back to where some of that is, that information is, but
Jim, did you have an additional clarification or did you get it in there?
No, I just want to remind everybody, this is cumulative too. So this would be the total annual bill, all charges coming from the new district. The legacy district charges go away. Right, really important for you guys to grasp that part.
Okay, I'm gonna go to Eric and then I'm gonna scan the room and it looks like maybe James next.
So just sort of a reality check on this. Residents in Bridgeton, in my neighborhood, in the last fiscal year paid $42 per household. This year, because Penn 2 has some additional expenses, it's $55. What you're putting forward is to raise the taxes to $406 per household. Is that correct?
That's an
On
average
average.
across all the single family households. So it could be more or less depending on which parcel you have.
I think Hong has a clarification.
And I would say, just for purposes of this chart here, the property tax, the number you see, I don't believe takes into consideration compression.
That's correct.
So what you were assessed, or the Bridgeton neighbors were assessed, the $52, that took into consideration the compression aspect of property tax limitations. And you're right, under this model, the values go up. It's not a tax, it's a service fee. And based on the work of the experts, they're trying to tie it back to the direct services that you're getting. It is a little bit more.
No, it's 10 times more, Hong. That's not a little bit.
Yeah.
That's an order of magnitude increase.
And
Yeah, so Eric, I would say on that point, you're absolutely right that that's an important lens to be looking at this. I think two factors driving that. One is the overall difference in costs that we're looking at. You know, the new district, the budget that was prepared for year 5 is a more expensive level of effort than what's currently going on for all the drainage districts combined. And then I think another point that you've raised earlier that could have the potential to shift some of this would be looking at the access fee that we have here, the benefits of access. And if that is or should have a larger share of the total costs that we're allocating to customers. And if we allocate those costs to customers, not on a flat fee basis, but based on trips or jobs or one of those other measures of economic activity, that would have the net effect of shifting more of the overall costs that we're seeing here away from residential customers towards commercial and industrial customers. And so when you're looking at these different fee structures here, and you're looking at the cost of a single family home inside the managed floodplain and seeing that it's a heck of a lot more than you're used to paying, I think that the 3 factors you've got to look at is the overall budget that we've come up with here the right budget? If so, is the allocation of dollars to the managed floodplain appropriate, or should more of these dollars be allocated district-wide or to the larger watershed? Though we've heard pushback today about the share that's being allocated to the watershed. And then third, is the share that's being allocated to residential customers appropriate compared to how much should be allocated to commercial and industrial customers? And I think all of those, there are technical questions and alternatives that we can look at that could shift the numbers substantially, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that they will, because as I look at this and think about a commercial customer, whether it's Portland Yacht Club or Columbia Edgewater, they pay order of magnitude about 70 grand a year in their fees. And under this mechanism, they would be paying something that's more like 8,300. And then the question that we have to ask is that really proportional to the benefits that are received? Or is this in fact a really regressive form of taxation?
Yeah, so Eric, we asked you to help raise political concerns, and you did. That's one of them, right?
Two
So
other things.
noted on our list for further discussion and exploration.
2 other things I want the board to remember as you're thinking about the total number. You control that. The second one is we're 7 years out from today with what that number is. So there's a big inflation factor in that forecasted number. And the last is about 25% of the proposed costs in the forecast you have are related to collection or under collection. right? So if we can reduce that, we can drop this number by 25% straight off the top. And again, it's an initial forecast. So these are things I want you to remember, right? Because these costs are going to be higher 7 years out anyway. But Eric, you are raising an excellent point, and I want to acknowledge that. But there are also some factors driving these numbers up that are really out of our control, right?
So far, but that you're working on.
We're working on.
James.
Thank you. I've got a couple questions, or a couple comments and a question. The first comment is I just want to pause for a second and thank the team for what we're seeing here. There's a lot of detail in the packet. I want to thank the board members for the questions you've submitted in the past, because those were included in our packet today, and they were very much for me worth reading because they offered some perspectives that I don't have. I think I'm noticing though, there's a difference between the slide numbers on that we're seeing today and the slide, I'm sorry, the slide number, the number like 17, sorry. Not the financial numbers, and those that are in our packet. So when we're sending our questions, because I think a lot of us have things to say that we'll think of later, and obviously we don't have time for everything, but I think noting the page in your packet or trying to note some detail, because I think there is a discrepancy between the slide number in our packet and what we're seeing today. My question is from, I think, slide 19 here and slide 16 in our packets is the definition of public and right of way. Yeah, thank you. Is public and right of way completely synonymous? In other words, we're just talking about right of way? Are we talking about other public property? That's one question.
Can we let them answer that just so we don't lose it?
So in this case, this is, and Nick, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but this is public right of way. We have other public property grouped into the other category. There's a variety of smaller categories that are lumped into the other. But this one is, we broke out specifically right of way because we knew that would be of interest. Did I get that right, Nick?
Absolutely. Great, thank you. That's very helpful. And then my second question was other. It's not now, but at some point I'd really love to see what other is, because I represent hundreds of acres of city land that don't neatly fall into industrial or commercial. So I just want to put that out there.
Yep.
That some people need information about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can provide that detailed distribution. It was just, again, we didn't want to blow your brains up with all of the detail that you can't actually see the distinguishing differences on these slides with the scale. But we have all of those results in the customer categories that you all have seen before. And so that's, I believe there's some public undeveloped and public developed are broken into separate categories.
You guys all put up your placards while I wasn't watching. Who's next? Steve.
I'll put mine down.
Thank you. That helps.
I think normally with regard to how long I've been involved in this, I think of it as a great advantage to have all the knowledge that I've had and being able to see how this has evolved. In this case, I feel like the baggage that I bring is hard, because some of that baggage includes past conversations I've had with my council. And I have a lot of trust built with them. And I have a lot of, just leave it at that I take that very.
Oh, can you, hand him a mic.
It's
or
on.
James.
Okay, I take that, as we all do, very, very seriously. I think if you could go to slide, this slide, the detailed distribution, go back to the numbers. That one. So I wasn't focusing when I was looking at this at the managed floodplain, because I felt like folks that are in the managed floodplain are paying assessments now, and that Eric's points are great, depending or concerning how high that's gone up. I'm more concerned about looking at, I'm not even that concerned about $2 a month with regard to single family residential district wide. Where I get really concerned, and where my council is going to be really concerned, is when we look at $11 a month for the watershed, where they're not paying a dime of this now. And when you overlay, again, the qualified census tracts, QCTs of Gresham, these are the folks that have a hard time paying their bills now. And you overlay that with the watershed, guess what? They're the same. I mean, there's a lot of overlap there. And back in 2019, when I was describing this to my council, we were talking about a $10.5 million district. And I know that that I'm going to acknowledge that's nowhere in the universe what this is going to cost. But that's what we were talking about with them. The impact aggression was $1.50 per month. And that was a blended watershed and district cost, $1.50 per month. Now I'm seeing $2 a month for district and $11 a month for watershed, and the watershed's a third of Gresham. It's almost a half of Gresham. So that's concerning. The other piece is commercial. When you look at commercial, and again, I wasn't even focused on the watershed in this, but I was looking at district wide. We're going to take folks that aren't paying a dime today and say you're going to, on average, I get this is averaging, and we're not doing ourselves any favors by looking 7 years out. We need to start looking, I think, immediate. I would never go to my council and say, I need rate increases, and this is what it's going to cost you 7 years from now. Feel free, just like we're doing here today. So we need to somehow scale that back, because these numbers can get, Jim's point's great. These are inflated because they're 7 years out. But still, $1,000 to every business in Multnomah County when they're not paying now. Watershed, $3,600. That's $300 a month. They're not paying anything today. That's concerning. I mean, we are going to get crushed on that. And it does all point back to the overall cost of this. And unfortunately, we need to find a way to reduce that dramatically.
Okay, several political flags for sure, or pragmatic ones, I think, in this case as well. Sarah and Nick, do you have anything that you can add on affordability? Because I know you
Yeah.
have some potential interventions there that I don't think you've talked about yet.
No, that's right. Thanks, Sarah. I wanted to bring that up. Again, when we go back to the criteria that we're looking at this on, there are equity considerations that we want to take into account here, and that is analysis that we will be doing. We have been doing a little bit of it. We have some all of the baseline comparisons that we'll be using for that, to the extent that that we're able to get the granularity we need. But the equity analysis is an important piece of this, and that will point to where there are areas where you all may want to consider tools that, for instance, waivers based on income that you could use to address some of these affordability and equity considerations. So that is a layer that you can put on top of the rate structure, but it's not something at this point. This analysis helps us to point to figure out where we need to look for potential equity impacts. And then we think about imposing that layer on top of an existing structure.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left, I think. I see Shirley's hand up, and let me know if there's, oh, we still have cards up. I'm sorry. Shirley, just a minute. Corky's been in line a long time, and Nancy before that. I'm not doing it. I'm trying to facilitate two meetings. It's really hard, actually. Go ahead, Nancy. Thank you guys for your help.
Okay, so I do agree with Steve about the inflation piece. It totally bends my brain. I get where you're going, but you can put it in, if you can put it in today's dollars, we'll freak out less than we are now.
I was trying to be really transparent with you all.
Yeah, we're not proposing putting a pamphlet out tomorrow.
I know like financial
Yeah.
people deal in that like inflationary milieu, but I can't do it. If I knew what I was going to pay for milk 7 years from now, I'd be really upset. So if you could give us a version in today's dollars, that would be sweet. I also heard about what you were just saying about an equity layer. I know at the city of Portland, we have a certain threshold that if you're under that threshold, we discount or completely reduce your costs. So I assume as a board, we'll be doing that. And I heard you say, Jim, like that this is an average for single family residential now. I mean, this is in 7 years, the average for SFR. And I think if we look at the managed floodplain only, we'll see what that is too. What's the average for an SFR now? Because single family residence.
Managed floodplain.
Yeah.
The challenge is because of compression, it's super lumpy.
Well, I know, even with compression, like what is it now, I guess?
Do we know that?
If we could just
not
get back.
across all that. I pulled, because of compression, the best that I could do earlier today was to really pull some random examples. So Fairview Lake, someone that might be near Fairview Lake, around $250 a year. Someone off of Meadow Drive, around just shy of 300. Someone on Bridgeton, you heard Eric say, $40 to $80, depending on what type of property. So what actually shakes out, and because of compression, it's hard to do sort of
Right.
what exactly the average is, but we
Yeah.
can follow up with some.
I
more.
get that. So some people are going to have sticker shock just because they won't be compressed anymore. And I think Portland Parks will definitely be one of those. And then, but I also want to remember, I mean, we are comparing it to what it is now, which is totally not enough. Like, we're all going to be mapped out of the floodplain if we continue on our current course. So if we could compare it, how it would be if there was no district, and I think that's the 100, that's the second distribution, is only charging the managed floodplain.
That's the second, yeah.
Okay, so we would get, so if we went to that distribution, that's the comparison with all the inflation and stuff. If the current four managed floodplain districts have to pay for all the levy and all that kind of stuff, all the, to stay accredited, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And Nancy, I think I can tell you, and I wish Lori were here, but she's got a family thing that's far more important than this. I think we're drawing approximately $8 or $9 million in assessment fees from floodplain currently. We supplement those revenues with debt and with service agreements.
Mary Helen, I just want to guess, did you want to throw a number out into that conversation, or was it a broader
Yeah,
topic? Corky's next in line, though.
Yes,
If you
yes,
wanted to, you
just
can.
quickly. I did a survey of about 10 neighbors, and what they showed on their for 1 acre lots, and I think Val Humble's on the call, but some people have 3, and that would be in the 300, but it's right around 120 to 140. So for a 50 by 100 lot standard, I know Colin said off of Meadow Drive has a lot of larger properties. So in my area where they're all standard 50 by 100 lots, it's about 120 to 130. So it would jump to 401. I understand that's a 7-year figure. That's a big jump for a lot of people, and a lot of the properties are now rentals. So it'll affect renters as well.
Thanks, Mary Helen. I'm gonna go to Corky and then Shirley, and then we'll be about out of time. So Sarah and Colin, I don't know if you want to advise us on if there's another slide or two you want to make sure that we get to. Corky?
2 questions, and you can get back to me later on if you want with it. When I look at this chart, I understand most of the difference in numbers that kind of makes sense to me, except the district property tax, the difference between property tax and the other structure 1, structure 2, for the district, for the industrial and commercial. Those are big differences, and I don't know why that is. So I'd love to get some more information. We don't need to go into it right now, but I'd love to, help me understand this chart a little bit better. The other question, and here's where I'm going to show my ignorance, but when we talk about the inflation, and we should be looking at today's numbers, I think, and this is I'm going to say it as a statement, but it's really a question, that if we were doing property taxes, we could do that. Each year it goes up and up and up and up. At least mine has been. I don't know about yours. But since we're talking about since we're talking about a GO bond, actually mine's gone up a lot more than 3%. That's what bothers me. But since we're talking about GO bond, you're trying to say, here's my inflation over the period of the GO bond, and you start paying an equal share of that in year 1. So I don't think we can put off that in the inflation effect.
So the GO bond would be a separate charge on top of this, to be clear. This is operating revenue only.
Okay.
If the voters approve a general obligation bond, that will come in on their property tax bills separately based on their assessed value.
And so this can go up each year based on the fees. All right.
It can, again, it's up to the board to determine what fees it wants to assess.
As I said, I was going to show my ignorance. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And again, what we've attempted to do in your staff's working hypothesis is that it would be best for the initial elected board to not have to raise rates in the first 5 years of operations, which is why we've given you a larger number and a 5-year outlook. But you guys can change your minds and say, screw them, let them do the rate increase. That's okay. We're trying to be really clear with you what we think it's going to look like 5 years out.
Appreciate it.
You guys also have control over what that total dollar amount is, and I want to stress that we've given you an initial
You get close
forecast.
to your mic.
I'm done. I can repeat.
He won't make himself. He's
I'm
just gonna stop
sorry.
talking. Shirley?
Well, see, three things. First, regarding compression, I'm hearing compression a lot, but we're not, this is a service fee. We don't have to worry about compression. I just want to confirm that.
That's
Yes.
correct. It's just
Okay.
when we're trying to compare to the existing assessments, it's hard to give an average because compression impacts.
Because of compression. Okay,
Yeah.
got you.
Yeah.
So regarding equity, a big portion of this district is going to be people of less means. And so I would think if we have an equity view, it'd be pretty difficult to raise enough revenue because there would be such a large portion of people that we would have to consider how we support that. And then along with that, so what about a nonprofit organization that's in affordable housing? How they pay too, right? They have to still pay a fee for this.
Unless the board adopts a policy that waives that or discounts that. And
Okay.
what I think,
Pick your mic up, please.
thank you. I think unless the board adopts something, that would be the case. And I think, and I'm looking to Hong here, that we're likely to have a voluntary reduction program because we won't have access to data to automatically reduce someone's bill based on income. We won't know what their incomes are. So again, it would be some sort of a opt-in kind of.
Opt-in.
Yeah, and just again, back to my point, there's a lot of people in this, it would be most of the people. So that would, a large portion of the people that would qualify. So it would really, undermine our ability to support this new agency, I guess is my point. So how do we either make rates lower to begin with, but if we go with the equity route, it would be dig a big hole into the revenue stream for this new agency. Then I just want to just point, obviously this is a huge sticker shock. It's a lot more money than what people are paying now or what many of us expected we would be paying. But the reason why we're doing this is because there is this new agency that has a lot of responsibilities that we got to support. So it's one side, I recognize it's a lot of money. On the other side, though, we have a responsibility to see that this agency is able to do its job. And so obviously we're going to have to find a balance there. But the reason why we're looking at this is because the 4 drainage districts right now don't have enough revenue coming in to do the work. And so we're moving to a model that is going to be a more robust agency that can make sure the protection is there. And then this new agency also has an environmental responsibility. And so there's going to be, I would hope, opportunities out in the future that this agency is going to be able to be a partner with other agencies. Of course, I'm thinking of Metro and the cities and some of the conservation districts to create more floodplain upstream. So we don't have as much worry about water and the lower levels. So it's things like that there's some opportunities that this agency has or this new agency will have that the current drainage districts don't. So I recognize it's a huge sticker shock, but that's our job, is to figure out how we make sure this agency can do its job. But I'm recognizing that we have to make these reasonable fees, but it's definitely a tightrope to walk across, and it's pretty challenging. But so thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of you that have been working on this. It's extremely well done and detailed, and appreciate all that you've done because it was very helpful for you to take us through this today. So thank you.
Sarah, do you have another favorite slide or two that you'd
Yeah.
like to show us?
We are going to skip over the other
We can come
3
back to this stuff, guys. We have
distributions.
a couple meetings
It's all,
planned around these.
yeah, so skip through these. You have them in front of you and you can kind of go through the details, but we did want to go back one. Wanted to pause on this one, which shows past meetings you all have asked us to produce results by jurisdiction. And that's what this does. It shows of the total amount of revenue, how much is being generated within the boundaries of the sub, you know, of the different jurisdictions within the full district. So this shows this by the 4 different distributions. And for those where we have multiple structures at the district level for cost distribution 1 and 4, we're showing the range there. So I wanted to capture any questions that you all had or thoughts on this slide, because it is something you have been interested in before.
Questions, thoughts, comments? Interest in moving?
I don't know right now. I'd like you to describe this better to us, so I make sure, but I know we're running out of time, so that can be done at a different time if you want.
No, I'm happy to describe it. So when you think about 100% of the revenue that we have, the pie, where is that revenue coming from by jurisdiction? That's what this is showing. So for the majority, go ahead, Nick.
Well, and Councilor Craddock, there were the 4 options that we showed you, with the leading staff recommendation being on the left-hand side. The detailed distribution is the one that we've been spending most of our time on. So at $31 million, 7 years from now, these are the percentages of 31 million that would come from those jurisdictions. And the reason there's ranges is because it'll depend on some of the decisions that you all make.
There you go.
Thank you.
Mary Helen.
Just a quick, I want to make sure I understood what Jim just said. These are charges for what are proposed charges for the new district, but we haven't decided on what they definitely will be. So we can choose to pay for less things, and then these amounts would be less. Am I understanding that?
Absolutely right. The other thing, you haven't decided the total amount of revenue. You haven't decided the distribution of that revenue. So you have options still coming at you that you have to work through over the next few months.
Okay, thank you.
More comments in the room or virtually? This was the right speed. I know you have a little bit more content that folks can take a look at home. Nick, I think the hierarchy that you gave us earlier for decision-making will be quite useful for the next couple of meetings there. I scribbled it down, and I don't know that you go in that order necessarily, but is this the right cost estimate? Is this the right allocation to different parts of the geography? Is this the right allocation between residential and other types of customers? And then Jim added to that, are there ways that we can find to get our collection costs down? Because that is one of the, that is a big chunk in there, right?
About 25%.
So that to me is a couple big lumps of work as we continue to dive into this information and perhaps request some amendments or make some suggestions. I would encourage folks to continue to submit questions offline if that's okay for the team, especially with the intent to convene the technical advisory group. Then we can come back with more and better information in the future. Sarah, Nick, Jim, Steve, any other final words for us here? I see that several of us have to bolt out the door at 5 here.
I just want to thank everyone for their great questions. So this has been super helpful.
I want to reiterate that this is all initial work product, and your direction will change it. And the other thing is, we're working with our consultant teams to come up with a really as best a way as we can to facilitate as much dialogue among you as we can efficiently. So if you have ideas or suggestions for how we can ensure you all get heard, we'd love to know them. But we'll be working really carefully with several of our best facilitator professionals to come up with ways to make sure you're all heard. And we'll take the time we need to have you get heard almost, because we got to keep this thing moving or we're going to run out of money. So, but really good questions, you guys. And I just want to stress, this is all initial work product, and your feedback is going to really influence it a lot. And so don't sweat that we're nearing a decision, because we're not. And we're going to really spend time with you to get more guidance. I believe that staff, after another couple of months of discussion with you, will be able to come back with a recommended alternative that should be closer to where a majority of you may be landing. But we don't know that yet, because we need to hear more from you. Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Anybody have any other announcements or business for the board?
I really appreciate the engagement, you guys. I know this is a lot and it's really complicated. So thank you for all the hard work you're doing and all the volunteer time many of you are providing. It's invaluable.
Okay, sorry, my mic was off. Any other questions or business for the board? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, friends.
Steve, I filled it off your comments, because I'd love to.
Thanks, everybody.